In a previous video, we talked about how you can add objects to your scene from other files by appending them. And so we can do that by pressing our Expand Library button here. So if I were to go into my examples folder and then press this, I could add any one of these files to my scene by moving my cursor over somewhere and then say selecting this file here and pressing append. That would bring the objects from that file into the scene. Of course, that brings in any materials they're using, animation, stuff like that. So I could right click over here and say select this draw mesh monkey bus thing here, press append, and that would bring this into the scene as well. However, once these objects have been loaded into this current file, there's really no more association with the file that they came from. Basically, it just copied that information out of those other files and just brought them into this scene. But there is a way wherein, say, we could have this monkey bust object in many different files, and then whenever we change the core file, all those changes, whether in animation, materials, or sculpting, no matter what we're doing, it will show up in all those other files. And that's an extremely powerful tool. And to do that, we use our link button here. So depending on whether or not the file you're linking from has groups or not, if the objects in the file aren't grouped, so say this object from selection.blend file, these objects aren't grouped, then it will just perform a simple link. However, if those objects have been grouped, then something much more powerful happens called dynamic linking. I'll give you an example of both. So let's press File, New, and Reload Startup File. If I were to link this object from selection.blend file with this Suzanne Borg head thing in it, so if I would just click this and press link, that would link this file to this scene. Notice, first of all, that this doesn't move to where the cursor is, and that's because the exact location of where these things are in that other file is where they will show up in whatever file that you link them to. So by default, this isn't super useful. So if I were try to click on any one of these objects, which you can see are this kind of like light teal color here, first of all, we can't scale them, move them, we can't do anything to them. We can't really edit them. There's not much we can do to them. So this would be maybe perhaps useful for like backdrops or scenery and things like that. So if we were to save this file here, so we could just press this down button to save a new file, and it's just called Suzanne.003.blend because that's whatever was active in this file. And we could go ahead and rename this by right-clicking on it. And of course, you want to keep the .blend or it will not show up as a thumbnail and won't work. So we'll call this our basic linked file here. That's what this is. And of course, it moves as soon as we change the name because this is in alphabetical order. So here it is, our basic linked file. So we could open up the source file that we just linked from, this object from selection. So I'll click and drag and drop it into the scene, which doesn't add or link it, of course. It just does a regular old open up the file. And so say we were to add a material to these glasses, I could click on my material tab. We haven't gone much over using materials, but we will soon in the future. And I could select, say, this copper material here and press use. So now I've added this material to this object here. So if I press this down button, which brings the file down into the folder, it saves it. Of course, if the file is already saved, it already has a name, it will just save over that file. So we loaded this object from selection.blend. So if we press this, it will save those changes. We can actually see them right in the thumbnail because of the position of our camera controls how the thumbnail will look. So now if we click on our basic linked file, just click and drag it into the main 3D view to open it up. It kind of looks the same, but it is a whole nother different file. You can tell because we have that cube in here. But anyway, you see that the changes have propagated up through here. So we could, drag our camera up here, press our render preview button, and see that copper material on these glasses here. Basic linking works kind of decently if you didn't plan on it moving or anything like that, but the much more powerful version of linking is dynamic linking, and that happens when we link objects that are grouped. So I'll show you how that works. This time, I'm going to head back into my examples folder and then press my expand library button. So what I want to do is open up that object from selection file. Then we want to make sure that these objects are grouped. So we just B to do a border select, which they're already selected. And then we can press Control G, which creates a group out of this. So if we come down here in our outliner and right click and select View Groups, here's this group. So we could maybe name it something a little more useful, such as the Borg group, I suppose. And right click and press go back to our regular view of the outliner. And then we can press our little down arrow button, which saves this file down into this open folder, which it will just save over the file that it was open from. So we'll click that. And so this is now saved. And so now if we go to File, New, Reload Startup File, and this time we click on the Object from Selection file there and press Link. Notice this time that even though we linked it, it doesn't just stay in its default static position where it is in its own file, but it actually moves to where the cursor is, just like when we append a file. I can now do really cool stuff with this, just like I can with any group instance. And if you're unfamiliar with groups and group instancing, I recommend you watch that video a few videos back. But I could go ahead and close this up and press F to insert a keyframe, which also moves my timeline down a second. Then press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, move this head over here, and press F again. Then I could press R to rotate, Z to constrain to the Z axis, S to scale, and maybe rotate again, just make some kind of big glaring kind of Suzanne Borg head here. Press F to insert another keyframe. Now if we right click to drag this timeline back and we press play, we have this little animation going on, which is pretty sweet. So down here in the camera, I could go ahead and press Follow Selected, which will follow my Suzanne Borg head. And I can use the camera animation controls to press play here, just as a means of convenience. And so we've got this little animation. So we could click our up arrow, and we could save this new file down into this open folder by clicking this button here. And this just gets saved as what was active here, the Borg group. And we could rename this or save it, but we'll just keep its name because that's fine for now. Because this file that we linked this from was grouped, it was linked dynamically. So let's open this file back up by dragging and dropping it into the 3D view. So pretty much any changes we make to this, down to position, scale, rotation, what kind of materials we add or use, adding objects, deleting objects, this will all show up in that linked file because it's dynamically linked, which is totally cool. So I'm going to press Shift A, and under Groups, Select Group, I'm going to turn off Select by Group so I can select these individual objects here. I could once again say select these glasses, give it a material, maybe give some other material to this, say brushed steel or whatever. I could create new objects. I could press Tab to go into edit mode here and say press space for face selection and then shift select some faces here and here. And I could make an object from my selection, press Shift D to make an object from selection here, and then say press E to extrude these. So maybe some kind of weird eyebrow things, I don't know. Okay, so then all we would do is press our down button, which saves over the file this was, and you can see that it's changed now because it's got, the camera has taken a new thumbnail of it. So then if we click on our file where we had the animation, click and just drag it into the 3D view. So now we see that those changes have propagated into this other file, which is awesome. So we can even play this animation back. And of course, everything works and it moves and animates as though it had been there all along. There's those extra pieces we made, the materials we added, etc. So like I said, we can even animate individual things in the original file and have it show up in this link. So if I were to come down here, click on the object from selection file again, click and drag it into the 3D view so we can work on it again. We could do something like right click here to bring the 3D cursor there. I could say press Shift A, under mesh, add a cylinder shape here, press S to scale, tap W a few times to give it some smoothing, tab to go into edit mode, space for face selection, E to extrude that, E to extrude again, and S to scale to tighten that up a little bit. And do the same thing here, E to extrude again, S to scale. Then I could press tab and press S to scale, middle mouse to constrain to scale this something like this, S to scale again. And so maybe this is some kind of pull thing that these weird things float around, I don't know. And I could say, let's click this to close that up for now, and we could press F to insert a keyframe, and then press 5 to go into top view, R to rotate, hold control to constrain, and rotate that halfway, press F again, and we could press R to rotate, hold control to constrain, press F again, R to rotate, control to constrain, and press F again. So we've got this kind of weird little animation here, so this thing just moving around like that. I could say move this cursor along by right-clicking and dragging it, press D to duplicate these frames, and then just let go of this one near that, and it will of course snap to my timeline thanks to Sensei Format cursor snapping there. And so we've got this little animation in this file now. I could click here, press this down button, which saves over the file there. So that's good. Then we could open back up the file where we had the animation by clicking and dragging it into the 3D view. And here's the file, only I forgot to add that pull bit to the group. So let's go ahead and open that file back up again. And let's click here and press Shift A, and under groups, click under add to group. We want to add this to this main group here that we've been using. All right, so now that it belongs, if we press this down button to save over it, and then drag and drop the file with the animation, now it shows up because it's a part of that group that got linked. So we could close that. Now we can press play again. And notice that the animation moves even with the rest of the object, so everything works exactly as you would expect it to, which is really cool. So using these techniques, you can build up insanely elaborate, awesome things. Even just, still renders, this kind of workflow gives you an incredible amount of control, because you can end up making a really elaborate scene where you can be able to just focus all your efforts on one file at a time that is very segmented. And that way, when you have a huge scene going on, like things aren't slowing down, it's not difficult to work with. Also, with this kind of workflow, you can save these files on the cloud, like say Google Drive, for instance, and you could be working with someone in Idaho or Italy and have a team spread out across the world and have, some people working on models, some people working on animation, what have you, and then just have your Blender library pointed towards that location. So these are incredibly powerful tools. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you're fairly new to all this, this may seem a little over the top, but it won't be long before you begin to realize just how insanely helpful this stuff is.